Okay, Boker Tov. We are today doing Daf Kaf Bet Amud Aleph. We're holding on Daf Kaf Aleph Amud Bet towards the bottom-ish where it says Shalach Le. The first word on the line is Lehu. Then it says Shalach Le Rav Misharshia. So we're still in the middle of the sugya of Shniyot LaArayot, Arayot Derabanan. An interesting thing that's going to come up at the end of our Gemara is what about Gerim? You ever thought of that? Is there Arayot Derabanan by Gerim? So B'ezras Hashem we'll see what the Gemara has to say about that. Either way, Shalach Le Rav Misharshia mi Tusnia le Rav Papi. So Rav Misharshia, he asked the following question from Rav Papi. He said, Yelamedenu Rabenu Eshet Achi Avi Ha'av Va'achot Avi Ha'av Mahu. What's the deal with the grandfather's brother's wife and the grandfather's sister? So the grandfather's sister-in-law or the grandfather's sister. So you have over here somebody, his father's sister or his father's brother's wife. That's Asura Midoraita. What about the grandfather's brother's wife or the grandfather's sister? Do we say there's an Isur Derabanan over there? So the Gemara explains. Midilamata erva. Do we say since the generation below, meaning his father's sister-in-law or his father's sister is deoraita? Lemala nami gazru. So therefore, the generation above his grandfather's brother's wife or his grandfather's sister is going to be the chachamim or goes there. It's going to be asuram derabanan. Gazrube o dilma. Or do we say no? There's a generation gap, and since the generation is it's a separate generation, Chachamim will not go there on that. So that's the question: grandfather's brother's wife or grandfather's sister. Those two cases, is that one of the Shniyot LaArayot or no? So says the Gemara Tashma, Ma'in Shniyot v'Lokachashiv Luhu. The Gemara says, we brought a Braita earlier on the previous Amud. The Braita listed 8 Shniyot LaArayot, and this was not on the list. So the fact that it's not on the list shows that it's not one of the Shniyot LaArayot. This doesn't count grandfather's sister-in-law or grandfather's sister as part of that list. So the Gemara says, Tana v'shir. Really, that Braita was not including every single one of the Shniyot. It's Tana v'shir. The Braita listed, but it also left some out. Its purpose wasn't to count every single one. So generally the rule is whenever you want to say Tana v'shir, when you want to say that the Braita left out some things on the list, there has to be something else on the list that's also left out to prove that it's not a conducive list. It's not a complete list. So the Gemara says, My shir dehai shir. Well, what else did it leave out that you want to say it left out this? So the Gemara says, Shir Shniyot de be Rebbe Chia. It left out the Shniyot of Rebbe Chia, which we're going to see on Daf Kaf Bet in a few moments. We're going to see Rebbe Chia also had a list of Shniyot, 6 Shniyot, that are not on that list of 8, on that Braita that we saw on Daf Kaf Aleph Amud Aleph. So the Gemara says that's what it's left out. Either way, what's the halacha with grandfather's brother's wife or grandfather's sister? So Amemar Achshar be'esh Achi Aviv Avi Aviv Uva'achot Avi Aviv. So Amemar, he was machshir these cases, the grandfather's sister-in-law, the grandfather's brother's wife, or the grandfather's sister. So Amemar was actually machshir. He allowed someone to marry his grandfather's sister-in-law or grandfather's sister after the grandfather died, obviously. All these cases, we're talking about that she's not an Eshadish, obviously. So Amar le Rav Hillel Rav Ashi. So Rav Hillel heard about this heter, and he said to Rav Ashi, Ledidi chazia lishniyot mar breder Ravana, viktivan shitzar leisura. So he said, listen, I saw, Rav Hillel said to Rav Ashi, I saw a list of mar breder Ravana. I saw in his on his desk, whatever. I saw a list of Shniyot LaArayot, and it said there's 16. So how do you get to 16? My love, Tamni de Matnita. You have 8 of our Braita. Vishit de Be Rebbe Chia. And you have 6 of Rebbe Chia. So 8 plus 6, 14. V'hanach tarti. And you have these two, grandfather's sister-in-law and grandfather's sister. So that makes So that makes 16. Hashitzare. That makes 16. So the Gemara says, so Rav Ashi said back to him, Ultamech, Shivsare Havyan. So, one second, according to what you're saying, there should really be 17. Why? Before, earlier on this Amud, we mentioned Eshet Achi Ha'em Min Ha'em. We wanted to know what the halacha was by that. The mother's sister, the mother's brother's wife, basically, the mother's sister-in-law, through the mother. So, it's this person's mother's son's wife. His mother only shares a mother with that brother. That brother's wife, his uncle's wife, to this person. We came out that Chachamim were gozer. So there should be 17 then, not 16. So the Gemara says, Halo kasha. Hanach tarte dedamian lahadadi kechad achashiv lehu. Those two, meaning these two cases here on the screen, the grandfather's brother's wife and the grandfather's sister, so the grandfather's sister-in-law and the grandfather's sister are counted as one. They were counted as one because Rashi explains they really come from the same source. It's through the father and the grandfather, and it's a sibling of the grandfather. So they're counted as one. That's how you would get to 16, not 17. So Hashitzare, that's how you get to 16. But either way, Vamikol Makom Ledidi Chazialan Diktivan Leisura. So Rav Hillel says either way it doesn't matter. I saw how could Amemar allow someone to marry his grandfather's sister or his grandfather's sister-in-law? I saw it on the list of Mar Berei de Ravina. I saw it that it was listed as asur. So Amar lei ultamech iavektiv lehetera mihavet samchat alayhu. So Rav Ashi said back to Rav Hillel, he said, according to what you're saying, if it would have been written on his desk on a piece of paper that this was mutar, you would be somech on it. You would rely on it to go marry this relative. What, he signed on it? He gave like a psak? This is just some note that you found on his desk. This is not an official psak. He didn't stamp on it. So hashtanami dichtiv leisura. Also, now that he's writing it leisur, lav mar berei de Ravana chatim alayhu. This is not given as a psak. Just because you saw some writing, on the side of his Gemara on it, doesn't mean that this is, a psak that he gave. This is just, he's just writing this as for his own notes or something, but it doesn't mean that this is a psak that he's giving. Okay. So we're coming out. Actually, the truth is there's the machloket, the Tosfot on the bottom of Daf Kaf Aleph Amurav, the very last Tosfot brings machloket Rishonim, whether we paskin like Amemar, machloket al Ma'aseh, whether we say machloket Rishonim, whether we say grandfather sister and grandfather sister-in-law would be asura to an individual. Okay, now we go to the Braita of Rabbi Chia. We mentioned before Rabbi Chia has 6 arayot that are shniyot on his list. So Tana de Rabbi Chia, Shlishi shebebino. So Rabbi Chia says like this: you have Shlishi shebebino, the third generation from his son. Okay, so what does that mean? So you have over here a person. You have 1, 2, 3. So his son's granddaughter. So that's a shniya. V'shebebito, also through his daughter. So that would be his daughter's granddaughter. So you have a person who has a daughter, and then a child, and then a daughter. His daughter's granddaughter. That's also a shniya. V'shebeben ishto, also same thing through his wife. So his wife's son's granddaughter. Veshebebat ishto, or his wife's daughter's granddaughter. Shniya, all of those are shniya. Now notice when we say the number, when we say third generation, we're saying third generation not from him or from his wife, third generation from his son or his wife's son, right? Revi'i shebe chamiv. So now fourth generation from his father-in-law, but over here we're counting his wife as number 1, and the Gemara is going to explain why. His father-in-law, the fourth generation from his father-in-law, so that means his father-in-law's grandmother. So it's his wife's generation number 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's his father-in-law's grandmother. In that scenario, she's going to be a shniya. Vishebachamoto, and his mother-in-law's grandmother. So his wife is 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, fourth generation through his mother-in-law. So we have 6. His son's grandson, his daughter, or his son's granddaughter, his daughter's granddaughter, his wife's son's granddaughter, his wife's daughter's granddaughter, and his father-in-law's grandmother, his mother-in-law's grandmother. So the Gemara says all of those, that's Rabbi Chia, those are the 6, all of those are shniot. So Amar le Ravina le Rav Ashi, Ma'ishna lemala de kachashiv la leishto, Ma'ishna lemata de lo kachashiv la leishto. So Ravina said to Rav Ashi, how come when we're counting upwards, when we're going through the in-laws, through the father-in-law or the mother-in-law, we say the 4th generation, meaning we're counting from the wife, and we're counting up 1, 2, 3, 4, right? The wife is number 1, 2, 3, 4. Also by her father, his father-in-law, the wife is 1, 2, 3, 4. How come we're counting the wife, but when it comes to the way down, we're not counting him or the wife? We're counting on the way down 3rd generation. We said 1, 2, 3, not counting himself. Or also even when it's through the wife, we're counting the wife's son's grandson, 3rd generation from the wife's son. So we're counting 1, 2, 3. Why are we not counting 4 and counting from the wife or from the person himself? So that's the question. So says the Gemara, Lemala de Isura mikuach ishto ka'ati chashivla. When we're going up, it's all through the in-laws. So the Isur is coming through the person's wife. Since the Isur is coming through the person's wife, so it counts his wife as number 1. But lemata de Isur alav mikuach ishto ka'ati lo kachashivla. But on the way down, the Isur is not coming through his wife, it's coming through himself. Right? So it counts from the next generation. It's not counting himself because the Isur is coming through his own lineage, through his son. So it counts 3 generations from his son. So the Gemara says, well, that doesn't really fully answer. Why? Even in the first set of Rabbi Chia, where we counted 3rd generation, we had the grandson of his wife's son, and the granddaughter, of his wife's son, and the granddaughter of his wife's daughter, and that's coming through his wife. So we should have said 4th generation. We should have said his wife's 4th generation down and counted from the wife 1, 2, 3, 4, not from the daughter-in-law not from his wife's daughter 3 generations down. So v'lo kachashivla, it doesn't count his wife in that scenario. So it comes through his wife, it should count his wife, it should count 4 generations. So the Gemara says, Aidi detana shlosha dorot lemata dide v'lo chashava tanenami shlosha dorot lemata dida v'lo chashava. Since it started off, meaning the way to understand Rabbi Chia's list is it's broken up into 2 lists. The first list is going down. So on the list going down, it starts off with himself, right? So that counts from his son 3 generations down, because it's not going to count himself. He's the individual that we're talking about. So it's his son 3 generations down. Shalom Aleichem. So that's right, and the next one, his daughter 3 generations down. So since it's that format, so when it goes through his wife, it also counts from his wife's son 3 generations down, his wife's daughter 3 generations down. But once we're going up, the whole Isur, there's no Isur upwards that's being counted by Rabbi Chia through himself. It's all through his wife. So in this second set, since all the Isurim of the second set, meaning going upwards, are through his in-laws, through his wife, so it counts his wife as generation number 1, and it says 4 generations up through the in-laws, starting from the wife. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a shnia. Okay. So we're holding by where it says Amar le Rav Ashi le Rav Kahana. It's on Kaf Bet, Amud Aleph, pretty much in the middle of the Amud. So Amar le Rav Ashi le Rav Kahana. So Rav Ashi said to Rav Kahana as follows: Shniyot de Rabbi Chia yesh lahen hefsek o en lahem hefsek. So we just got through a list of Rabbi Chia's shniyot la'arayot. Rabbi Chia had a list of 6 shniyot la'arayot, 6 individuals who are arayot midurabanan. Question is, does it stop at where Rabbi Chia said, or does it continue? So For example, the first one was his son's granddaughter. So is it true by his son's great-granddaughter, or does it stop at his son's granddaughter? Or on the way up, we had his father-in-law's grandmother. So does it stop at his father-in-law's grandmother, or what about his father-in-law's great-grandmother? Does it keep on going for all generations, or does it stop at the example that Rabbi Chia gave? So says the Gemara. So yesh lem hefsek o ein lem hefsek tashma. Damar Rav. Dalid nashim yesh lem hefsek. Vetulo. So the Gemara says, well, we brought beforehand on Daf Kaf Aleph Amud Aleph that Rav said there's 4 ladies, 4 arayot that have a hefsek. The rest go for all generations. So you see that Rav didn't include these in the 4 ladies that have a hefsek. That means these go for all generations. So the Gemara says, well, you don't necessarily have a proof from what Rav said. Why? Dilma ki ka'ama Rav la'i matnita. Maybe Rav was just talking about that braita, meaning that braita brought a list of 8 ladies who are shniyot. On that braita, out of those 8, Rav said 4 of them ein lahem hefsek. 4 of them go on for, 4 of them yesh lahem hefsek. 4 of them stop at a certain point. The rest go on. But maybe that was only in that braita. Could be Rav would agree in other braitas. There is a hefsek. In this list, there is a hefsek. And it does stop at a certain point. So that's not a good proof. So Tashma, Shlishi v'Revi'i. So the way Rabbi Chia expressed it, he said, 3rd generation going down from his son, meaning his son's granddaughter. And 4th generation going up from his wife, meaning his father-in-law's grandmother. So it sounds like those are the arayot. So Shlishi v'Rabanan, so Shlishi v'Revi'i in, those, the 3rd generation down from his son, or 4th generation up from his wife, those are the arayot d'Rabanan. Those are what Rabbanan were gozer, but tefei lo, more than that, no, the Chachamim were not gozer, and it sounds a little bit that yesh hefsek. So the Gemara says, no, that's not necessarily a good proof either. Why? Dilma mishlishi ve'elach mervi ve'elach. Maybe what he meant is that's the first one that's a shniya, his son's granddaughter, meaning his son's daughter, that's asura midoraita. His son's granddaughter is a shniya, and it does continue for all generations. So 3rd generation down from his son would be a shniya, and it could be that it continues for all generations. Or 4th generation up from his wife. His wife's father's grandmother, right? His wife's father's mother's mother, or wife's father's mother, doesn't make a difference, right? Maybe those are Asuri Midrabanan, and it goes up for all generations as well. So the Gemara leaves it at that, doesn't really give a clear answer. So Amar le Rava le Rav Nachman. So Rava said to Rav Nachman as follows: it says, Chazi mar haim Rabbanan da'atem mima'arava v'amar ba'u b'ma'arava gazru shniyot begirim ulo gazru shniyot begirim. So he said, did you see somebody come from Eretz Yisrael? And he said that in Eretz Yisrael they asked the following question. They asked, when were Chachamim gozer shniyot la'arayot for gerim also or not? Somebody converts, so is it asur for him to marry his grandmother or any of these cases of shniyot la'arayot? So Amar le, so this was Rava speaking to Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman said back to him, he said, what type of question is that? Hashta uma erva gufa. By a regular erva, real 100% full-fledged arayot by a ger, ilav shelo yomru bain mikdusha chamura likdusha kala lo gazru b'Rabbanan. Rabbanan wouldn't have been gozer arayot on a ger if not for the fact that it would look bad. People would think that a ger would say, I came from a lesser a higher level kedusha to a lower level kedusha. Why? Because when I was a ger, I also had arayot. When I was a goy, I also had arayot. Right? A goy is not allowed to marry his sister, not allowed to marry his mother. He's not allowed to marry certain arayot. So now that I converted, I'm allowed to marry my sister. So because of that, Chachamim made a gzera that he's not allowed to marry his sister. Because in reality, there's a rule, ger shenit gayer. We're gonna get more into this later on in the Masechah, the sugya of gerut. But for now, what we need to know is there's a rule. Ger shenitgayer kekatan shenolad dami. A ger, right? This concept that a ger, who after his gerut, he's like a katan. He's not related to his family of goyim. Therefore, if a brother and a sister convert, so each one is a new individual, and technically the brother would be allowed to marry the sister because they're not related anymore. They're a new person after the gerut. So the thing is, Chachamim made a decree, made a gzera, that their brother and sister are not allowed to marry each other. Why? So the Gemara over here is saying because before we were, gerim, when we were still goyim, we were not allowed to marry, and now that we convert, we're allowed to marry. It looks like we came from a higher level kiddusha to now a lower level kiddusha, that we're allowed to do something that we weren't allowed to do before. So Rav Nachman is saying, if that's the whole reason that gerim cannot even marry real arayot, so what? Chachamim were going to be gozer on shniyot also. So once again, just ilav shelo yomru bain miktusha chamura lektusha kala lo gazu bo rabanan shniyot mebaya. If not for the fact that it would look like they're coming from a lower level kedusha, from a higher level kedusha to a lower level kedusha, Chachamim wouldn't be gozer on regular arayot. So you're asking me if they're being gozer on shniyot? Of course they're not going to be gozer on shniyot. So Amar Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman said that gerim hoil vat leyadan neimu milta. Once you brought up gerim, let me tell you something about gerim. Achin minaim lo yayidu. If you have two brothers that are gerim, so really they're no longer related. They're two brothers that shared a mother that are gerim. So lo yayidu. They shouldn't testify together because we know two brothers. The Gemara says even Moshe and Aaron are psulim to be edim. So if you have two brothers, they shouldn't testify together. Even if they're gerim and they're technically not related, but if they share a mother, they shouldn't testify together. Edutan edut. But if they do testify, their edut is a kosher edut. Now, achin min ha'av, if you have brothers who share a father, so they had different mothers, but they had the same father, and then they converted, so me'idin lekatechila. They could even be me'id lechatchila. So you have two brothers that share a mother that convert. They're not allowed to testify lechatchila. If they do, we accept it. And if you have two brothers that share a father, they could even be me'id lechatchila after they convert. So what's the difference? So Rashi explains because the yichus, and we're going to see more about this much later in the Masechet, but the yichus of a goy through the father he's not really miyuchas through his father. He's miyuchas more through his mother. So by brothers from the mother, then we're more machmir, lechatchila they shouldn't testify, but by brothers through the father, even lechatchila they can testify. Because
it's like a gzera type of thing?
It's Chazal bring that Kadosh Baruch Hu was kind of like mafkir the yichus of the father, was the zera of the father. We're gonna Bezrat Hashem when we get to those dapim.
The mother's the problem.
Yeah.
That's kind of like a zera because they're more kind of related to the mother even though they're not related.
Yeah. It's an azhar. It's a chumrah. Yeah, it's a chumrah derabanan. The lechatchila they shouldn't do it, but we don't have such a thing by the father. Amemar Amar afilu achin minahem nami meidin lekatchila. Amemar says, even achim min ha'em, even mother, even if they only share a mother, they could still be made lechatchila. Umay shna ma'arayot. Now, what's the difference between edut and arayot? When it comes to edut, we're saying that two brothers from the father are allowed to testify, and Amemar says even two brothers from the mother lechatchila they could testify. Definitely b'di'eved, their testimony is good according to everybody. But when it comes to arayot, you have two siblings that convert. They're not allowed to marry. So how come when it comes to edut we don't view them as siblings, but when it comes to arayot we view them as siblings? So the Gemara says, erva lakol mesura. Erva is something that's given over to everybody, meaning everybody practices marrying. So everybody's involved in that area. But edud lebedin mesura. Testimony is given in front of Beit Din, and therefore Beit Din know that ger shenitgayer kekatan shenolad dami, meaning when when two people get married, so everybody will see, and people may think that, oh, I'm allowed to be mekadesh my sister. Look, that guy did it, and he's mekadesh his mother. But edut is specifically given over in front of Beit Din. So we're not as worried that somebody's going to see that two brothers are testifying and they're also going to testify. So when they go to Beit Din to try to testify, Beit Din is going to say, sorry, we can't accept your testimony, you're two brothers. You accepted their testimony, so explain to them. They're gerim, ger shenitgayer katan shenolad dami.
Right.
But kiddushin is a person could just take two edim and be kadesh a lady.
Right. From Rashi,